welcome to Sun's Spotlight on Scripture. My name's John Swain. This is part one of a 9-part series entitled Riddles, Mysteries and Enigmas, where we look to shine the spotlight into some of the corners of the Bible and hopefully highlight the hidden treasures to be found there. In this episode, we'll be considering the exodus of the Israelites from the land of Egypt under the leadership of Moses, and their journey through the wilderness until they came to Mount Sinai, where Moses was given the 10 Commandments by God, and they built the portable place of worship known as the tabernacle. In order to do this, we first of all need to understand something of the geography of the area. This is a map of the Sinai and the surrounding countries. You can see the Red Sea, which at the top splits into 2 arms, east and west. Today the western arm is called the Gulf of Suez, and the eastern one is known as the Gulf of Aqaba. But for a long time it was all known as the Red Sea. Running down the eastern arm is the Great Rift Valley. This starts high up in Lebanon and continues for some 3,700 miles into East Africa as far as Mozambique. The Great Rift Valley also forms the Jordan Valley and the Dead Sea Basin. At some 429 meters below sea level, the shores of the Dead Sea are the lowest elevation on the planet. The Dead Sea itself is around 304 meters deep at its deepest point. The Great Rift Valley runs down through the eastern arm of the Gulf of Aqaba, where it is 1,500 meters deep in parts. That's just under a mile deep. The Sinai Peninsula is formed in the fork of these 2 bodies of water, like a huge inverted triangle, and it forms a land bridge at the top between Egypt and Israel. So this is where the story of the Exodus is played out. Here we see a typical map you might get at the back of a Bible. It shows the routes the Israelites took after they left Egypt, travelling down the western side of the peninsula until they reached Mount Sinai, then back up the eastern side until it becomes a massive jumbled route as the Israelites wandered around for 40 years after failing to enter the promised land. The problem we face is that over a period of some 27 years of archaeological investigation in the area, no evidence has been found for a large group of people ever having camped there. The Bible indicates that there were approximately 1.2 million people who set out from Egypt. But no evidence has been found for such a large group within the time frame of the Exodus, which is around 1440 BC. This raises some questions regarding the Exodus. First, did the Exodus really take place? And secondly, if it did take place, is the Sinai that we know today the Sinai of the Bible? And lastly, is the traditional route the one described in the Bible? Let's take the first question. Did the Exodus really happen? Well, it's obvious that something dramatic happened at the dawn of the Israelite nation. For right from the start, they have celebrated a night of liberation in the form of the Passover festival. Right from the beginning, this festival has celebrated their freedom from slavery, and its ritual and symbolism have remained largely unchanged down the centuries, indicating that the purpose of this memorial feast has remained the same. Some shared experience brought them together. No other evidence has been presented that would cause us to doubt that the Exodus was that initial shared event, which bound them together and forged them into a nation. Some would say it's too far-fetched. But is it any more far-fetched than Israel returning to their homeland after 2,000 years of being scattered around the world and defeating a better equipped coalition of Arab armies that outnumbered them 3-1? Both required a miraculous outcome, which many consider the latter to be. So for lack of any evidence against the Exodus taking place, let's proceed on the assumption that the biblical account is correct and see if we can find any evidence to support it. The length of time since the Exodus event means that any evidence will be sparse, like breadcrumb trails, just little snippets that might help us to form some kind of understanding of how it all unfolded. Our next question was, is the Sinai we know today the biblical Sinai? Why should we doubt that? It's always been known as the Sinai Peninsula, hasn't it? Well, has it? The ancient Egyptians knew it as Mafkat, the land of green minerals. Today, Egyptians sometimes call it Ard al-Firuz, the land of turquoise. This is because the Sinai Peninsula is dotted with emerald and turquoise mines. So how and when did it begin to be called the Sinai? Enter onto the stage of history Flavia Julia Helena Augustus, better known as Emperor Constantine's mother, Helena. After Constantine's so-called conversion to Christianity, Helena embarked on a pilgrimage tour of Israel and Egypt looking for holy sites and relics. Travelling to the tip of the peninsula, she decided that a certain bush was the one Moses saw burning when God spoke to him. She also decided that the mountain overshadowing the bush was the one Moses had climbed to receive the Ten Commandments from God. As the Bible had called this mountain Sinai, so this mountain that Helena had picked out became known as Sinai, and the region the Sinai Peninsula. Thus the mountain became known locally as Jebel Musa, the mountain of Moses. Now, because Helena was Emperor Constantine's mother, no one dared challenge her. After all, she had already found the cross Jesus was crucified on and the nails that had pinned him to it. She had also discovered the site of Jesus' burial and had commissioned the building of a church there, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So, Helena's declaration of this being the site of Mount Sinai over the years went from speculation to tradition to historical fact within church teaching. This led to questions about where the Israelites crossed the Red Sea and the route of their journey through the wilderness to the Promised Land. Over time, as Helena's assumptions became entrenched in church teaching, scholars produced the kind of maps we might get in the back of our Bibles, which we all believe. Who wouldn't? They're in the Bible after all. There has been much speculation about where the Red Sea crossing happened. Some have suggested that it was one of the large, shallow lakes situated between the top of the Gulf of Suez and the Mediterranean coast. One of the lakes that was put forward as a candidate was about 10 to 15 centimetres deep, so not such a big miracle was needed to cross that. The bigger miracle was that God buried Pharaoh's armies and chariot in 6 inches of water. Another problem that has arisen is that the plain at the base of Jebel Musa, where St. Catherine's Monastery is today, is not big enough to accommodate 1.2 million people, leading to speculation that the numbers given in the Bible are symbolic rather than factual. Exodus 12:37 speaks of 600,000 men of fighting age, plus women, children, and the elderly men exempt from battle. In addition, there were some Egyptians and other nationalities that had chosen to come out of Egypt with the Israelites. This gives us an estimated number of 1 to 1.2 million people involved in the Exodus. If the Israelites did camp here for the best part of a year while they received the Ten Commandments and made the tabernacle, they left zero archaeological evidence. Not a pot, not a trinket, nothing. So it begs the question, are we looking for the evidence in the wrong time period or the wrong place? The problem is there is no evidence for any period in history that such a large group of people ever camped here. Because of this, several Christians started to suspect that this area in the Sinai Peninsula was the wrong place. They revisited the scriptures relating to the Exodus, and one scripture they felt was key to unlocking the mystery is found in Exodus 14, verses 1 to 3. And it says, "And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, that they turn and encamp before Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, over against Baal-zephon. Before it you shall camp, for Pharaoh will save the children of Israel. They are entangled in the land, and the wilderness has shut them in." There are some key distinguishing features to the place God was sending them to. He was deliberately trapping them in order to liberate them through a mighty miracle. He wanted them to know that their freedom was all down to him and not their own efforts. So let's unpack some of the key words in this passage. And it says, "And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel that they turn and encamp before Pi-hahiroth," that means the mouth of the gorge, "between Migdol," which is the tower, "and the sea, over against Baal-zephon," which means master of isolation, i.e. the wilderness. "Before it you shall camp, for Pharaoh will say of the children of Israel, they are entangled in the land, the wilderness has shut them in." In other words, the land had herded them into a trap. There is nothing near the top of the Gulf of Suez that could even remotely be considered as a place that could trap that number of people. So where? Let's try to unravel the mystery and consider the likely journey that the Israelites took. There are two possible routes, but one fits scripture better than the other. We can't be certain about either of them. We weren't there at the time to know, but we can look at the clues the Bible gives us and see which route might best fit those clues. The first route starts off following the same course as our Bible maps, down the west coast of the Sinai Peninsula to the tip, and then a short way back up the eastern coastline. This brings us to the narrowest part of the Gulf of Aqaba at the Straits of Tiran. Here there are several islands that span the Gulf, and if the sea were moved back, these islands would connect up and form a land bridge that the Israelites could cross over. Once on the other side, they would travel via Mara and Elim round the foot of the mountain range of Jebel al-Luz to the large open plain at the foot of the tallest mountain peaks. The second possible route takes the Israelites across the top of the Sinai Peninsula, then turning back down the eastern side of the Sinai, where, following a steep-sided 15-mile-long twisting gorge, they would eventually arrive at Nuweiba Beach on the shore of the Gulf of Aqaba. Having crossed over at this point, they would have linked up with the other route to Jebel al-Luz. Nuweiba Beach is huge, being about 28 square kilometres in area. At its southern end, the cliffs come right down to the shoreline, blocking any exit in that direction. At the extreme north end of the beach is the remains of an Egyptian military outpost or tower that's currently being restored. This would have blocked the Israelites' northern escape route from the beach. Here at Nuweiba, we have all the elements spoken of in the scripture we read: the gorge, the tower, and on the far side of the Gulf, in what is now Saudi Arabia, the wilderness. Nuweiba Beach would be more than big enough to accommodate all the Israelites, but was totally enclosed. Once they had entered the gorge, there would have been no way back for the Israelites, as Pharaoh's army could easily control it. It's easy to understand why Pharaoh should say that the land had swallowed them up. This is where the geography of the area that we looked at the beginning becomes relevant to the crossing of the Red Sea. You will remember how the Great Rift Valley forms the eastern arm of the Red Sea, and that it was nearly a mile deep in places. We've seen how the Gulf of Aqaba becomes shallower at the Straits of Tiran. Well, echo soundings taken off the Gulf in the Nuweiba Beach area found that the seabed gently slopes from the beach and then suddenly drops to around 450 metres. However, they found as they came towards the southern section of the beach, the seabed rises and creates a land bridge right across the Gulf to the Saudi Arabian side. Sloping gently down from the beach at Nuweiba and up again on the other side, this land bridge is only 18 metres below the surface at its deepest point. Dives have been made at both the Straits of Tiran and Nuweiba. At Tiran, the seabed is normal, with small amounts of coral that have formed on the rocks. Coral doesn't form on the sandy seabed. It needs something solid like a rock to form around. At Nuweiba, the seabed is scattered with coral formations that don't seem to be natural. The dives at Nuweiba were filmed. So let's join one of these dives.
If we assume that a number of artifacts were spread out on the seabed, sooner or later corals would start to grow on them. And of course, if you have a number of layers of coral growing on something, it's very hard to distinguish the structure that was there from the very beginning.
Though the coral complicates any search here, it may have been instrumental in preserving the shapes of ancient artifacts. For coral is a living organism that will not begin to grow on a foundation of sand or silt. Instead, it must first attach itself to a solid object, where it will sometimes conform to the shape of its host.
So for instance, if it would grow on a wooden artifact, the wood would normally disappear in the seawaters after a time. But if you have corals growing on the wooden artifact, the coral could have the shape of the wooden artifact. And then the corals would consume the wooden material over periods of time, but still keep the shape of the wooden artifacts.
During the course of his explorations, Moeller observed that the pattern of coral growth at Nueva differed from other parts of the Gulf. Unlike the coral at the northern and southern ends of Aqaba, which often forms large, dense reefs, some covering many acres, the formations at Nueva Beach are generally smaller and scattered randomly across the seafloor. Divers familiar with the area have compared the distribution of coral here to a junkyard and the aftermath of a disaster. This description is fitting, and among the strange formations in these waters, many display features indicative of human engineering.
When we dive and when we film at the Nueva location, we look for certain structures, and you try to look for 90-degree angles or circular objects, wheel-like structures. So that is what you scan for, so to speak, when you dive. There are situations where you see something that looks like an axle, a hub, something that looks like a wheel, and you say to yourself, this is not a coral reef, this is a coral growth on an artifact. And that is what's different to me when I compare corals at other locations around the world.
Since the earliest explorations at Nueva, one distinctive type of formation has often been identified on the seafloor. A slender, table-like structure, sometimes standing on end, with a coral-encrusted base, a straight shaft, and a circular top.
It's a 90-degree angle, a right angle, between something that looks like an axle and the wheel. And you can see this in different varieties, and it looks very different from normal coral growth. And it is like a man-made structure with a coral growth on it. A common question is, why didn't you bring up artifacts? And there are several answers to that. The best thing to do when you find something is just to keep it in position. Document it, but keep it in position. It's very easy to destroy anything. And the other thing, it's illegal to remove artifacts, but also you're not allowed to bring up any corals from the Red Sea.
Vivica also completed many dives on the Saudi coastline, directly opposite Nueva, locating and photographing coral-encrusted chariot parts near the shoreline.
And the Bible tells that Israel saw the Egyptians lying dead on the shore after they came across. So I figured there must be some stuff on the Saudi side. At one spot there is like a very shallow sort of land tongue going out in a straight angle towards Nueva. You could tell it by the shift of the color of the water. You could see how it was turquoise far out, you know. So I thought this would be interesting for exploration, so we did some dives near to that.
The The scattered, irregular coral formations on the Saudi side of Aqaba resemble those previously found off the Nuweiba Peninsula. In the midst of them, Pt1 photographed this circular object attached to what appears to have been a broken axle or hub. This discovery was significant for two reasons. Pt1 had documented the coral-encrusted form of a wheel with dimensions similar to ancient Egyptian artifacts directly across from the proposed Nuweiba crossing site. Her find also provided independent confirmation of earlier evidence establishing wheel-like formations on both coasts of the Red Sea in accordance with descriptions in the biblical record.
And the Lord looked down on the Egyptian army, and he made the wheels of their chariots come off.
So what that video didn't show you is one of the artifacts that was found on the seabed nearer to the Saudi side. This is a veneer of gold that has been left behind as the wooden wheel it once covered has rotted away. So who would have a gold veneered chariot wheel? We know it's likely to be off a chariot wheel because it's exactly the same size and shape of the chariot wheels found in the tomb of Pharaoh Tutankhamun. Exodus 14 verses 6 to 7 says that Pharaoh took all the chariots of Egypt. There would have been the old ones with the 8-spoked wheels, the more modern 6-spoke wheeled ones, and the choice lightweight elite group who had the latest 4-spoke wheels. Wouldn't Pharaoh have had the latest type and with added bling? Now seems unlikely that the mountain at the tip of the Sinai Peninsula is the one Moses climbed to receive the Ten Commandments. This range of mountains in Arabia is becoming more likely. Paul in Galatians 4:25 also alludes to Sinai being in Arabia. The highest peak in this mountain range is known as Jebel al-Lawz. Here we see the mountain peak and its blackened top. This is not shadow, this is burnt molten rock. Exodus 19 verse 18 says, Mount Sinai was covered with smoke because the Lord descended on it in fire. The smoke billowed up like smoke from a furnace, and the whole mountain trembled violently. Is this the mountain peak, the result of God descending on it in a furnace-like fire? This is not the only clue that indicates we might now be looking in the right area. On one occasion, the Israelites complained and moaned that they had no water. God instructed Moses to strike the rock, and water gushed out, providing refreshment for the people. On the western side of Jebel al-Lawz is a huge rock, 30 meters high, that is split from top to bottom. The fissure is big enough for a person to walk through. At the base of the fissure and down the rock is evidence of water erosion. At some point in the past, a large amount of water had flowed through the fissure and down the rock face, cutting and smoothing it as it went. There is also a huge amount of evidence to show that a large group of Semites lived in this part of Arabia. About 40 kilometers north of Jebel al-Lawz are rock inscriptions with ancient Hebrew writings and a drawing of a menorah, the 7-branch candelabra that was used in the tabernacle. This tabernacle was a portable place of worship that God had instructed Moses to make, and we'll be looking at that in more detail in the next episode. The tabernacle was the center of the Israelite camp. The various tribal families were assigned a place to pitch their tent, but not in any random fashion. First, we need to remember that there were 13 tribes. 11 of them were named after Jacob's sons, Joseph being excluded from the list, but having a double portion as the remaining 2 tribes were named after his 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. The tribe of Levi became the priestly tribe. They would have no land allotted to them in the promised land, but would live among the other tribes and be supported by them so that they could carry out their priestly duties. In the wilderness, God instructed them how they should set out the camp. The tabernacle was to be in the center of the camp. Moses and his family, which included Aaron, were to camp on the eastern side of the tabernacle by its entrance. The other families of the tribe of Levi were to camp in clan groups on the remaining three sides. The tribes of Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun were to camp on the eastern side. The tribes of Dan, Asher, and Naphtali, the northern side. Ephraim, Manasseh, and Benjamin on the west, and Reuben, Simeon, and Gad on the southern side. God was quite specific about these instructions. For instance, if Judah had spread to the north, they would no longer be on just the east side. They would have spread northeast. Similarly, if the tribe of Dan had spread east, they would have mingled with the tribe of Judah. The lines of demarcation between the tribes would have become blurred. So it seems they stayed within the confines of their respective sides, and this would fit very much with the Jewish way of thinking as opposed to our Western way. If this were the case, they would have spread out from the tabernacle in order to accommodate the tribes. In Numbers chapter 1, we are given the number of people in each tribe that was eligible to fight. In addition to this, as we have already said, would be women, children, and elderly men. But it helps us to get some idea of the size and scale of the tribes on each side of the tabernacle. The total for Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun was 186,400. For the Reuben side, 151,450. For Ephraim's side, 108,100, the smallest of the groups. And for the Dan group, 157,600, which is a similar number to Reuben's group. The Israelites orientated their world east to west, using the rising and setting sun as reference points, just as we use the north and south poles to orientate our world. So if we draw the tribal blocks in relation to each other by size, we get this. Here, depicted in the wilderness, is a statement of the greatest rescue which was to come. God living or tabernacling among men, God in relationship with mankind through the cross. One more interesting account that adds strength to these events being real and not myths is found in Exodus 13 verse 19. Here we are told that Moses took the bones of Joseph with him in order to rebury them in the promised land. Well, archaeologists working in the Nile Delta have uncovered a large high-status building. The Nile Delta was where Joseph's family settled when they came down to Egypt during the time of the famine. This large building is the only one of its kind found in the Delta area. One of the main people involved in its excavation is Egyptologist David Rahl. David believes the Bible is as much a historical document as any other ancient document. His work in reassessing Egyptian chronology has meant that biblical and Egyptian history can be synchronized. This was not something he set out to do, but was a result of many years of painstaking work and research. Here is a short video clip from one of David's lectures about the excavations at this palace-like structure.
This is what it looked like, the palace. As you can see, it's a magnificent building built on top of Jacob's house for the successor of Jacob in the land of Goshen, in the city of Avaris. And in the back is a garden with a whole set of tombs. If we look at those tombs, we find these major ones with these domes here. If we count them, there are in fact 12 of them. And one in particular is unusual because it's a pyramid tomb. Now, in this period, nobody other than pharaohs and queens had pyramids given to them. Private people never had pyramids. And yet the guy who lived in this palace had a pyramid constructed for him, which is a significant honour for any individual in Egypt in the 12th dynasty. So already we see something unusual about that tomb. When they excavated it, this is the surface. The pyramid had long gone because it was higher than the current modern levels. But we can start to see here, this is a little hallway or chapel, and then there's a rectangular base with a pyramid on top of it, and the tomb, yet to be excavated, is underneath there. And I'm going to show you that as we excavate down into it. The plan, it looks like that. So we have the chapel at the front with the entrance, we have the base for the pyramid, and we have underneath the pyramid a mud brick chamber where the burial took place. The nearest equivalent we can find to that is something from the 19th dynasty, these typical burials of a later period when pyramids were used by private people. That's the sort of design we're talking about, but with the chapel a little bit further out. Now, as we dig down into the tomb, we start to find some very interesting evidence. Well, first of all, that's tiny fragments of limestone, chippings. That is all that was found inside the burial chamber, just those little bits there. And then that thing was found between the chapel and the burial chamber in a tunnel. Okay, got that so far? If we look from the burial chamber here, where this man is standing in the blue galabeah, that's the corner of the burial chamber, and we look back towards the chapel, we see the little pile of chippings, and we see this. That, I'm going to reveal to you in a second what that is. If we look from the other side again, back into the burial chamber, here's that thing again. Here's the burial chamber with the man standing in it, and there's a few more fragments of limestone. But look at the burial chamber itself. You see it's empty. And if you can just about make it out here, there's a dark shadow, a sort of a circle, a black patch. That is actually a robber's tunnel, dug from the chapel into the burial chamber. Somebody in antiquity gained access to the burial chamber through that tunnel. And here is another view of the tomb chamber, very difficult to see. But there's those fragments of stone. There is absolutely nothing in there. No body, no pottery, no coffin wood, no mummy beads, nothing. Now, if you're a robber and you're going to break into a tomb, do you take the bones with you? No. You take the gold, you take the things of value. You don't take the bones of the deceased person. This isn't grave robbery, this is something else. When we restore and reconstruct the fragments of that thing that was lying in the tunnel, it turns out like this. It's a colossal statue, twice life size, so it's about that high, seated figure, seated on this throne. He's got some unusual features, this man. Well, the first thing to notice is that it's been savagely attacked. Somebody's gouged out the eyes. Somebody's tried to smash it in two with an axe on the head. The whole face has been smashed off. Somebody didn't like this fellow very much. You can see the attack on the head with axe blows here. They tried to break it to pieces. Notice, though, it's beautifully carved. The hair is magnificently done. And actually, the fragments of paint here show that the hair was red in colour. This man had flame red hair. And on the paint that survives on the brow here, you can see that that is yellow. It's not brown. Now, Egyptians normally depict the colour of their skin for men brown or reddish, and for women, yellow. But when they want to portray a foreigner from the north who doesn't get the same sun as they get, they portray them with yellow skin. So we can tell from this that this man is not an Egyptian, he's actually a Semite, an Asiatic, with flame red hair. On his shoulder, he carries a throw stick, which is like a boomerang. It's a hunting weapon to kill ducks in the marshes. And that is the symbol of a foreigner from Canaan. Whenever you write the word Amu in Egyptian, which means Asiatic or Western Asiatic, the determinative figure at the end of the hieroglyphs is a throw stick like this. So it's a symbol of a foreigner from Canaan. So this guy has got a scepter that says, I'm not Egyptian, I'm actually from Canaan. You can tell from my weapon that I'm carrying here. And if you go around the back shoulder of this statue, can you just see the faintest remnants of stripes? Can you see this red stripe there? And you can see a blue one going that way, another one there. There's a collar here, and there are stripes running down the coat. Let me help you out with that. just by highlighting them a little bit. This man from Canaan, with his foreign throw stick, wore a multicoloured coat. Let's restore his face. This is what was left of the statue, the colossal statue, smashed by somebody. Now, I think you can start to guess who might have smashed it. Could it be the Egyptians after the Israelites have left? Here is the vizier who lived in that palace in the land of Goshen in the time of King Amenemhat III, when there was a great famine. And he had yellow skin and red hair. He didn't have a beard. Just like the Bible story says, he shaved before he met Pharaoh. So, this is the big question for the end of the first part of our day's discussions. Is this the reality behind the story of Joseph and the Israelites arriving in Egypt? So, we have a lot to think about. What we'll do in the second part is we'll go on now to look at the Exodus itself and what happened in the Exodus and what happened to that statue, because clearly the Israelites didn't do that to the statue, somebody else did. And the reason why there's no body in the tomb, as you all know, is because Joseph was taken out of the tomb by Moses and taken to Shechem in the hill country of the Promised Land. So you would not expect to find a tomb with Joseph's body in it in Egypt, would you? Which is exactly what we find. Okay, thank you.
And here we can see a reconstruction of the statue, based on the bust found in the excavated tomb, and using known forms of dress most often used by Egyptians to depict Semitic people. Are we looking at Joseph, the one who went from prison to palace and saved a nation in a time of famine, whose image was despised and attacked out of hatred and frustration when over 400 years later the Israelites left Egypt? We don't have any definitive answers. We can't say for certain this was Joseph or this was the route the Israelites took. But when we look at the discoveries, Nuweiba, with all the features mentioned in the Bible, the gorge, the tower, the wilderness opposite, the mountain with its top scorched and molten, the great rock split in two and eroded by water, the ancient Hebrew language and a picture of an item from the tabernacle carved in the rock nearby, the empty tomb and the deliberately damaged statue, all put together make a strong argument that the Bible narrative is true and not just a myth. It then begs the question, if the Bible is true in respect to the Exodus, is it also true in its presentation of Jesus as God in human form, who out of love has come to save mankind from the consequences of sin and bring them into an eternal father-son relationship with their Creator God? As with all these riddles, mysteries and enigmas, only you can decide if they are true and whether to believe them or not. Until next time, on Riddles, Mysteries and Enigmas, keep well, stay safe, and God bless you.